everybody. I realize I'm the last speaker of the day, so thank you for staying here to the end. Maybe the flights departing the East Coast or to the East Coast with all the snows keeping you here. Either way, I'm glad you're here. And maybe there's a reason why I'm ending up as the concluding speaker of the day, because I'm probably going to bring a perspective that may be at a higher level or sort of encompassing of all the things that you've heard during really the last day and a half. This journey that I'm going to talk about actually began exactly 2 years ago. March 1st of 2016, I was asked to speak at the Energy Construction Forum. It was held in Galveston. This is, if you think about March of 2016, this is really the realization that, the oil price is quite low, may be here for quite a long time. What are we going to do for the people who design, plan, and construct these energy facilities? And I told them, I said, my job here today is to be very provocative and try to shock you into kind of thinking about things differently. And I gave them about 6 different things that we had seen at CII through the research process. Said, let's try to challenge our perception, our convention here. And they were very managerial. They were very technical and specific things that related to supplier equipment and modularization and the way that we manage projects and so on and so forth. And I got done, and literally there were 2 lines of people. One line was, hey, the 6 things that you just showed, 5 of those are absolutely, completely incorrect. What are you thinking? Very upset about this. The other line was a set of people that said, I'm glad somebody finally said it. And I think what happened there was it kicked off this conversation that's been morphing really now for 2 years about what is it that's going to move the business forward? What is it going to take to really change the business and produce the results that we're going to need? So that's what I'm going to talk about. The working title has been Operating System 2.0. It sounds a bit IT-centric, but it was really an homage to the fact that we've been operating under Operating System 1.0 since the pyramids were built, a very sequential process that we go from planning, we go into engineering, we go into construction, we go into operations. Because it's not parallel processing, it's a serial process. It takes a long time, potentially costs a lot of money. And the question is, well, how are we going to break through that? How are we going to start unlocking real value in our industry? So what I'm going to do today is talk about really 2 things. First, I'm going to diagnose what I think and what we've seen and the research has shown us to be the problem. So diagnose where we're at today as a business. And it'll be financial concepts. It will be stock price values. It will be talking about the things that normally we don't talk about as project managers and project people. And then the prognosis, which is, well, how might we break out of this? Now, because I'm at CII, obviously the prognosis involves a heavy dose of research and development to actually figure out what all those moving parts will look like. A private company might not think quite that way, although certainly private companies do a lot of research and development on their own internally. They might, test things, test them on the market, see if they hold water, so on and so forth. So the very first slide that I showed 2 years ago, and I'm showing it again here today, is this picture of the same refinery on the U.S. Gulf Coast. Picture's taken 50 years apart. It looks basically the same. We're still using essentially the same pots and pans and pieces, including a lot of the same process chemistry. And what this has caused us to get to a point is that the projects are, not only are they unsustainable from a performance standpoint, in fact, we find that only 5.4% of them can truly be judged to fall within the constraints and the promises that were given to the board of directors. Okay, and that's from a project execution standpoint. They're also unsustainable from the fact that they're not even financially viable. Like the amount that it costs to produce these things, you can't sell the product at an economic rate. There was a recent article in Fortune magazine about Shell, how they've basically taken half the weight off the top sides just to live with a lower price oil environment. So fundamental, complete rethink of the project and technologies that are involved just so that it can be economically viable in today's marketplace. So the thought here is that if we re-engineered the actual business ecosystem, we might be able to have much more economically viable projects, and we might be much more financially viable and successful as suppliers, as engineering firms, as construction firms, and ultimately as owner companies, people who own and operate these facilities. Through this journey, actually ran into somebody that said, you know, CII is a best practices organization, but you know, best practices equals outdated, because if we go around the room and we all talk about, well, what's the best practice that we're doing in whatever it happens to be, tomorrow it's a new day and everything that we have is outdated. And John actually put a slide up there, and he had a quote in there from The Innovator's Dilemma, a book by, and it said, the very management practices that have allowed companies to become industry leaders also make it extremely difficult for them to develop the disruptive technologies that ultimately steal away their market. And so you're seeing this in multiple ways. But this isn't to say all these 17 best practices we have at CII are bad, and certainly the development and the logic that went into creating them, there are elements of this that should be used, but maybe they can be repackaged, they can be repurposed. One example might be you may have to unbundle a scope definition checklist from a process that is a serial process. You don't invalidate the scope definition checklist. You can evaluate the definition of a scope in a digital twin. You can do it in a traditional paper drawing, but you don't necessarily have to have it closely coupled with a front-end planning process that is very sequential or codified in a series of stage gates. So these are the kinds of things that we're going to have to challenge in order to make sort of breakthrough improvements. Now, what we do in this industry, I contend, is incredibly valuable, and I really start every talk that I ever give with saying, you know, engineering and construction is the basis of civilization. You don't have healthcare or education, energy or transportation unless you first have a capital project. And more than that, what we do is incredibly valuable because it improves the standard of living, standard of care around the world. But the problem here is the market doesn't value us. So I've got two graphs. These, it's a snapshot over time, taken over a 5-year period. The graph on the left shows all the publicly traded companies in the engineering and construction space traded on the New York Stock Exchange and measured, obviously, by the Dow. And what it shows is over a 5-year period, that collective group of companies has declined in their stock price by 4%. Meanwhile, the Dow in general, of which those companies also are a part, has gone up 71%. And even if you look in at the end of February, it had that little dip, but it's even more so than that, right? It's come back even through March. So if you had $1,000 or $10,000 or whatever, and you were going to invest either in the graph on the left or the graph on the right, which one would you choose? And here again is the problem, is that we don't have the level of business investment into our industry that's necessary to sustain the industry moving forward. We have to figure out what are the sources of business value and profitability and move that into our industry, and we have to do it, you know, yesterday. Part of this problem is really a business problem. And of all the technologies and all the platforms and all the great, you know, data visualization and design software tools and all that, and those are incredibly valuable and great. Those are going to take us to the future, but actually nobody's focusing on the actual business problem. And that's what we're really addressing, is saying, what is the business of this business? How should that look? How should we do the contracting, the tax, the accounting, the finance, the legal? Really, all of those things, people have not examined that. That's been stuff that either we're not interested in or we're scared of or afraid of. But what it shows up as, in the Fortune 500, there are 7 engineering and construction companies, collectively made 1.8% profit on $77 billion of revenue in the last report. And when you drill into these more, what you find out is 310% of their profits are made on 40% of their projects. So if you order the most profitable project to the least profitable project, the bottom 60% loses 210% of their profitability. So that at the end of the year, 100% of the projects make 100% of the profits. And so you'd say, well, like, why don't we just not do those 60% of those projects? Let's just do the first 40%. It's pretty difficult to do. But then there's other problems here as well, which is we put work in place and then bill for it. And when you do that, you're basically on the wrong side of the dollar. You're on the borrowing side, not the accumulation side. The thing that the banks figured out a long time ago was, if we have some money, we can loan it out and collect the interest of that money. Now, we have a tremendous volume of money in our business flowing through all the time. The key thing here is, let's hang on to it for at least a period of time so that we can get some profitability and some interest and some revenue off of that money. And that's part of that financial re-engineering of the actual business model. If we do that, I think what's going to happen is the projects are going to come back. And I'm going to, the rest of the talk, I'm going to really talk about, how do we get the projects to come back? My contention, and when we do the economic evaluation of this, we will have 250% more projects in the industry. We will go from a scenario where we have a relatively large number of companies chasing a proportionately low or small set of projects to the same set of companies chasing a very vast set of projects. And that will also help improve the profitability. In fact, it goes up by about 300%. But right now, we're in this intense competition, especially in owners, with all other kinds of ways to make money. So they can buy their shares back, they can buy a company, they can buy an asset from another company, and then they look at the capital project, and even though somebody in their organization says, I have this great idea, we should go do it, I think it'll make 22% year-over-year return, they say, well, that's great, but it requires that engineering and construction set of people. I don't know. Our history on that's not so great. Let's just go for the share repurchase, which I absolutely hate share repurchase. I mean, it's the worst because you may increase your share price a bit, but you're not actually making anything. And there's no long-term value that's being added to your corporation. So you're just arranging the deck chairs to increase the stock price for a while. So we are the builders. We are the people who can make it happen. One of the things, especially inside the owners, is for them to start thinking of the projects that they execute as a profit center. There are a few owners, especially in the retail side of things, that do view themselves as a profit center. They put the facilities in place to make money, and actually the facility generates income for them. So we can't treat finance like cavemen. I always say projects treat finance as like a caveman with a checkbook. Oh, look, I got an invoice here for $2 million. I better write a check for $2 million. Wait a second, hang on to the money for a while, really understand what's the best use of that money, and we can actually do that. I'm also really afraid of the outsiders, and so you see that Amazon acquired Whole Foods in June of 2016. You see an immediate drop in the share price of Kroger. It's come back, as most things in the Dow have come back. But the question is, are we next? Maybe not so much are we next for Amazon taking over our business. I don't think they're really going to see that as a promising investment at this point. Maybe. But we are ripe for outsiders coming in and disrupting us. And one of them is Elon Musk. He's actually taking a look at tunnel boring. And he bought a tunnel boring machine, and he figured out how to make it go 14 times faster and 10 times cheaper. And people say, well, that's just like 3% of our industry. It's okay. But if we have 10 Elon Musks all taking 3% of our industry, next thing you know, we have a completely different industry. And this is the key point. Almost any industry that's faced disruption has had it happen from the outside. It's been very rare that it happens from the inside. The experiment we're talking about doing with OS2 is from the inside. This is all of us getting together, challenging the current convention to figure out, can we make something better? And in doing so, can we create a lot more value? This process of the outsider coming in is very disruptive. You go through about a 20-year period of just chaos. If we do it ourselves, the contention is we can do it in a much more structured and orderly fashion, maybe get to the ultimate result even faster. That is what we're trying to do. And in doing so, maybe we can move to being solutions providers. So this is a study that was done, and we showed it at summer of 2016, CII annual conference. We surveyed 35 owner companies. We talked to their project people, and we talked to their business leaders. And what we found out was that by and large, and we called it order takers or value creators. This was really the study of the owner's project teams. And what came out was they're really good at taking orders. When the phone rings, they pick it up, they say, yep, we know how to do the planning, the engineering, the construction, we'll build you a quality asset, we'll do it with really good safety. And their business leaders said, these people never come up with a suggestion of how to make more money for us, or how to decrease the downtime, or they're just waiting for us to tell them what to go do. And that's unfortunate because we have an amazingly bright set of people in our business. And we're afraid to have those conversations many times with tax and legal and accounting. I mean, in John's presentation, he says, I don't want to go talk to those guys. And maybe there's good reason for that, but I think we have to actually confront our fears and go and have those kinds of conversations, because that's how we're going to move it forward. Now, in all of that, the other thing here is that 40% of the cost of a project on average is transactional, and it is waste. And one of the benefits of technology is you can cut through that waste pretty quickly. You can use the technology to radically streamline the business processes of these things. If you go all the way back to SAP, for example, started in Germany, really in automotive. The idea was they sell a Mercedes here in San Antonio. The second that dealer here enters the VIN number as being a sold unit, they basically know they need to send another Mercedes sedan to San Antonio, which automatically kicks off an immediate purchase order to Michelin for 4 tires and a spare tire, and 8 spark plugs, and. It really made it much faster, and it was an accounting methodology. It was a way to track all of that value. The problem is that's flow shop. When we get into job shop in the project world, it causes some problems, and it's been difficult for a lot of people in the job shop industry to figure out how to do that. And again, this is the business platform that ultimately we're going to talk about. Our annual conference last year, we had the theme of Innovate, Disrupt, Transform. How do we transform? What's it going to take to move there? There's really basically 3 things: streamline and flatten the supply chain. Right now there's about 12 layers in our supply chain. I'll explain that a little bit more in a second, but we're flowing a whole series of purchase orders up and down through that. It's extremely slow, time consuming, and again, 40% of this is waste. Stretch each dollar. One of the things here might be getting rid of the capital. So instead of spending, say, $1 billion, and the first cost is a real problem for our projects. So instead of trying to figure out how to spend $1 billion over the next 3 years to put up a facility, maybe we really should look at that differently, and we should say, well, what about if we spent $50 million over the next 27 years? That may be all we need. And how would we do that? Well, we could lease absolutely everything. But we could lease it from all the people providing the equipment in the plant and the engineering for that. What would that do for them? Well, the income would be smaller, but it wouldn't be a one-time event. The peaks and valleys, and I'll illustrate this later, are really killing us. Evening out that cash flow is important. And here's the biggest lesson from the financial markets is around the world, whether it's the Federal Reserve or any other central bank, it's designed to make a large number of small loans. That's how they distribute their risk. If you go and get a house mortgage, right, you pay more interest rate once you get a mortgage above $417,000, right? Once you're above $417,000 in the United States, it's considered a jumbo mortgage. And traditionally, it carries about 1 extra percentage point or 1% more interest than a traditional mortgage, right? How about syndicating a $4 billion loan for a project? Could take 3 years. Because again, the banks, the financial system is not really designed to put a large amount of money in one place. That's putting all your eggs in one basket. When you distribute this across the 1,000 people, and literally if you have a $1 billion project, there are 1,000 companies that are working on it. You distribute that across the 1,000 players. You're out of the world of investment banking, and now you're into the world of commercial finance. Much better rates. If you go to investment banking, and this is my other thing that I absolutely hate, is vertical integration in our industry. It's absolutely destructive. It adds cost constantly across, and this is when another company buys another company. The current rate, if you're an EPC firm and you want to acquire another EPC firm, maybe slightly smaller than yours, most of our firms are paying on the order of about 12% interest to Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, and the like. And then the next day they turn around and bid on projects at 3, 4, 5%, ultimately make 1, 1.5, 1.8%. Well, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that you can't continue to borrow money at 12% and only return 2% into the coffers, right? This is a legal version of basically what Enron was doing. Okay? And you should really think strongly the next time that you hear about these things. And it's every 2 weeks in ENR. And this is very, very troubling to me. So vertical integration is not the answer. What we see is rampant, our industry is defined by specialization and fragmentation. And we call it fragmentation, we think about that in a negative way. It's actually good. It's good to see the startup culture, bringing in the innovation, all these ideas. The question is, how do you harness literally 1,000, 2,000, 4,000 companies on a big project and put them all together in a cost-effective way? That's essentially what we're doing. And then the last part here is shrinking for agility. So this isn't modularization as much as it is miniaturization. You see this in LNG. They're talking about going from large scale to mid-scale LNG. What about small scale? We're seeing it in modular or nuclear reactors. They call about small modular reactor. Well, when you get infinitely smaller, it does a lot of things for you. First of all, you can move this stuff into a manufacturing environment or a fab yard. You can actually attract workers into a manufacturing environment that's ergonomic and climate controlled. You can live in one location. Ultimately, I think you can take about 5/6 of the workers off of the site. We don't have a labor problem. We have a problem with labor willing to work out in the hot and the cold and the rain and the snow and the dust and the extremes. And so these are all things that could really help us a lot. So I already talked about leasing everything. I think there's some other advantages that I didn't talk about. Ford and the automotive companies, they don't make their money off selling the cars. They make their money off financing the cars. And so if you look at Ford Credit, its profitability is probably on the order of about 25 times what the actual manufacturing operation is. So this is where we have to accumulate it. We have to get to a point where these projects are not a one-time event. Possibly even take equity in the projects we're making, and that would be for everybody in the supply chain, the engineering, the construction, all of that. If you lease everything out, you're still owning it, right? If you lease a Mercedes, Mercedes actually still owns that car, because at the end of your 3 or 4 year lease, you have to turn that back into them, right? So just imagine if you're a pressure vessel maker and you put a 27-year lease on your pressure vessel, guess what? You still own that. But the good news about that is you will continue to depreciate that asset over time. And so some of the things that we look into are tax laws. If you actually look at the maker's evaluation in terms of property class in our industry, tremendous financial benefits to depreciating the assets if you continue to own them and lease them. So owning those makes a big difference. And then ultimately, if you're going to actually own something that's going to be out in a plant for 25 years, it may change your perception on how you create that product. You may want to change its makeup so that it can be serviced more easily and the parts are more replenishable and that kind of thing. If we're purely in a first cost game, what it tends to do is the product line makers, they're in a first cost battle. They have to get a low price. That's the CapEx thing. So in optimizing the CapEx, you end up with a cheap product, but then, guess what? On the maintenance side, it costs you a ton of money to continue to maintain that thing every year. So there's actually a lot of benefits that accrue to the owners and the operators of the facilities. So we conducted 4 or 5 workshops now, 3 in the US last summer. We've had one in Europe recently. We have one in Canada, I think. And what we came out with was a manifesto. When the software movement moved to Agile Scrum and away from IBM Waterfall Method, which of course is very sequential. It worked for a while, but that's plan the work the plan. We basically came up out of these workshops with 5 major things. This is what we call the manifesto. Number 1, we'll reduce all the layers in our pyramid scheme. And it is a pyramid scheme. We got the owners, and actually the banks sit at top, then the owners, then the EPCs, then the subcontractors, then the distributors, then the suppliers, then the raw material makers. In all of that, you've got logistics firms and so on and so forth, okay? If you flatten that out substantially, this is the flatten the supply chain, that can really give you a lot of benefit. New financial vehicles, new ways to look at risk management, new insurance products, eliminating sureties, eliminating distributors, There's a lot of different financial vehicles that can come into play here. Focusing on the total cost of facility ownership, blowing up this CapEx, OpEx problem. You know, you really want to optimize the whole. By the way, if you make things much smaller, so don't build one unit of 100,000 barrels a day, build 20 units of 5,000 barrels a day. What does that get you? It gets you to an environment where you have no shutdown, turnaround, or outage. Because you are continually taking one unit out of service, and it's not a big time pressure. You're not working 24/7 on it. You have plenty of time to get that thing reconfigured. You might even have one sitting there on standby to plug in. The stock price of an oil company dips in the summertime if their refinery goes offline for a shutdown turnaround, because it's the peak travel season and the marketplace says, uh-oh, they're not making cash during the peak travel season. We're going to downgrade the stock price. There's a massive, it's in the tens of billions of dollars for some of these companies. 4, embracing true collaboration with better risk management that builds trust. I don't think the companies are mistrustful of each other. I think the contracts that are in place between all of them cause the distrust. So blowing that up is important. And then valuing the innovativeness, creativity of the people is really important. How do you do that? So the opportunity here basically is we're going to create a new business model for the industry and a new business platform. And it's foundational. It's the tax, it's the accounting, it's the transfer pricing. One of the things I mentioned yesterday in the board meeting was that, you know, of 185 or however many countries there are around the world, they all have tax laws, they all have import tariffs, they all have export. Keeping up with all of that is incredibly difficult. But do you realize that if you want to buy something from Japan and put it out on a project on the US Gulf Coast, that if you buy it directly from Japan and bring it in here, that it could be up to 13% cheaper if you first bought it into Mexico and then moved it across using the current tax laws and NAFTA onto the Gulf Coast. Now, that's not conventional wisdom. Most people would say, I'm double handling that. I'm moving it first to Mexico and then I'm moving it over to the Gulf Coast. Maybe some people are doing that, but I think it takes computational power to process all 185 countries' tax laws, et cetera, to find the optimal combination. So CII is a founder and a sponsoring organization of this thing that we're now developing, launching as OS2. And one of the benefits of being a member of CII is you can participate in all the research and development studies of this as a volunteer, but you can also invest directly into the company. And yesterday in the board meeting, I outlined the investment opportunity for the members of CII's board. And what we're looking for is nominally $500,000 a year investment for the next 3 years. And I'll show you the list of companies that are basically lining up to potentially invest in that. What will this get you? Well, if you're an owner, it's 35% lower cost, 50% lower cycle time. What that does for you is it's 57% increase on your return on capital employed, return on investment. That's really what you're looking for. And if that happens, those capital projects, making something shoots to the top of the list in terms of what the corporation wants to invest in. They'll not even think twice about share repurchase if they get 57% better return on capital. Would you agree with me on that? If you could do that, they would do that in a heartbeat. And for the people who do the engineering and supply the components and do the assembly, I think it is 250% more projects and at least 300% more profitability. So this is the proverbial win-win situation, but it's an area of our business that we have never really looked at. We have tried to study the management side, the technical side, the design side, but we have to really think about the business side as well. So these are the companies and industry associations that are combining. I wouldn't say that all of them have agreed to do the investment. All of them have strongly indicated their interest in being an investor in this. I would probably tell you on the company side, about 20% of those companies either have CEO or board level approval of the investment opportunity here. On the industry association side, it's about half of those groups now have their board level approval to invest into this. If we try to take a look at who we think is actually going to do this in the end, and handicap those odds, our cap table right now is about $43 million. I don't think we're going to actually raise that much in the end, but we are looking for about $22 million to get it launched and get it running. One of the companies said, there's a level of energy and excitement around this that I've not seen in decades. And I think that's actually the purpose of CII, is we have to be a catalyst for that innovation and moving this industry forward. And this is one way to do it. In order, though, to reinvent this business model, it takes more financial resources than we actually have from the member dues. And we do want to continue doing all the great things that we're doing inside of CII, and that's why we look at starting a separate company. So we've called this the Operating System 2.0. The tagline has been for the last 2 years, collaborating to redefine the capital projects industry. We realized this wasn't a great name, so we went through a branding exercise. I'll talk about that more in a moment. But one of the other things I did want to show you is over the last 2 years, our strategic planning committee inside of CII has come up with 4 main themes that we think will take the industry to the future. Absent what we're doing in OS2, capacity building around the people, process innovation, technology-enabled transformation, so people, process, and technology, and then changing the business model, transformation of the business model. Even if all those investors decide not to invest, it's still the strategic intention of CII to examine looking at a new business model. So this is something that you'll continue to see whether it's got external investment or not. Now, creating a new industry business model is interesting. John was talking about Industry 4.0, and even in Germany now, they've actually kind of separated Industry 4.0, and they've talked about the software side and the actual manufacturing side of it a little bit. But sweeping change is required, and we have to transform ourselves, move into digitization, digital twin, all of these kinds of things. But I think the part that's really missing is that financial and interface model, the ability to integrate these literally 1,000+ organizations on a mega project. How do you integrate them all together and get it going? And technology is a key driver of that. So ultimately, I'm going to outline a few of the managerial and technical things, but then I'll close by talking about what it will do financially. Just real quickly, the workshops also identified that we've identified the future state, right? Reduce the cycle time by cut it in half, lower the cost. If that's the future state and we know where we are today, there's this gulf, there's this gap between that. And we have a set of constraints. We have a bunch of laws and regulations. And so as we did that, we realized, well, what are all the things that are going to be necessary to generate that value that we're looking for? And the little honeycomb graph on the left, it illustrates, you can't even read it probably, but it's a bunch of things that are not even, it's risk and it's human resources and it's supply chain. It's a whole litany of things, but it's really the business side revolved around all of those things. Many of them are people-centric or soft skill type things. Originally, about a year ago, we said OS2 was about 7 elements around the managerial and technical. It's morphed more into the financial, accounting, tax a little bit, but it doesn't invalidate these original 7 elements. So I'm going to go through them pretty quickly. First was, it was kind of owner-centric. What is the corporate governance around this? We looked at all the project management and development that has happened and largely ignored the enterprise management or the program management. Things like geopolitical risk should not be managed at the project management level, right? How are they going to do that? That's an enterprise level risk. Even a CEO of a corporation might not be able to manage it. Then it was also the integration with all these corporate functions, finance, legal, government relations, investor relations, tax, regulatory. Those are important factors, and in fact, the reason why a lot of the projects fail are those things. So the research and development opportunities coalesced around this kind of element, but also it's not necessarily a traditional owner. I would contend, and just sort of reading the tea leaves and reading a bunch of stuff, that about 4 or 5 years from now, really about 1/3 of the volume of capital projects will be done by a traditional owner-operator. 2/3 of it will be direct investment from the capital markets. You see that in the administration's plans to leverage 80 or 85% of their financing from private equity or other types of investment, government-backed and insured investment vehicles. That will continue, that will accelerate, that will hit the private market also, and that's important for us to get ahead of. Number two is the commercial model, and people talk about contracting all the time. Relational contracting is a big deal, IPD, an integrated form of agreement. But what I would say is, and we have a research team going on right now at CII for integrated project delivery for industrial projects, and that'll give their report in Indianapolis this summer. You won't want to miss that. But early on in that team's development, I was on a conference call with them, and they said, oh yeah, three-party contract, you know, owner, designer, contractor. And I said, yeah, I think you guys need to be thinking about what happens when you put 200 or 300 companies in one contract. Then there was this pause for about 40 seconds. And then they said, okay, yeah, I think we understand that. So I don't know if they got to that point or not, but it'll be pretty interesting to see. The illustration here was, I was actually on an airline. This was an ad in one of the magazines on the airline. It was talking about how Kentucky, there were 17 agencies that had to come together in order to approve a new construction site. And they said, this is really a problem for our state. Like, we can't attract manufacturing into Kentucky if it's going to take, 18 or 24 months to get all these regulatory approvals. So they selected, 25 odd sites across the state. They said, these are ready to go. All the permitting's done, all the legal's done, everything's done, right? Is this an important consideration in speeding up and accelerating the project? You bet, but it's not one that we would traditionally look at. And so this is what they say. Kentucky has all these build-ready sites. We've eliminated all the red tape. So that's part of the commercial model as well. Part of this, again, is not vertical integration. It's bundling with collaborators, not competitors. We collaborate with our supply chain. We collaborate with our technology partners. And this is the model of bundling. This was done by an economics professor named Barry Nailbuff at Yale. He was particularly upset that Lotus 1-2-3 went away. He didn't like Excel, but somehow Excel managed to take over. Do you know why? Because there was a series of people who preferred to buy the bundle. They said, I'm going to need a word processor and a PowerPoint anyway. I'll just buy the Microsoft bundle, even if all the pieces in it are inferior to the things I could buy individually. Okay? He studied this. The equations are mathematically fairly complex, but I ran them for you here. When you get to 6 people in the bundle, 6 individual products or organizations in the bundle, you have a 22% price reduction. You have a 262% improvement in the profitability of this. It wasn't predatory pricing. It wasn't monopolistic behavior. It was purely macroeconomics around bundling. We have the exact same thing happening in our business. Element 3 was design. I already talked about miniaturization, but part of this is also design reuse. We have a chronic problem in our industry of trying to design everything from scratch. But if you look at the next Corvette, it's 96% of this year's Corvette. They tweak it a little bit. They do that because it's tried and true and it's reliable and it's going to be good. Major design redesigns only come along about every 4 or 6 years. How do we reuse designs? How do we lean on suppliers and their innovation and supplier-led design, which I'll talk about in a second. Supplier-led design. Boeing 787 took 40% of the development costs out of that plane, 33% of the time out of that. Why? They did not use the pyramid scheme that we have on the left, where the owner sits at the top, command and controls everybody underneath them. They flipped the pyramid upside down. They put themselves at the bottom. Boeing said, we will support everybody above us. We will resolve all the interfaces, but we're going to let you design it. That's actually an automotive concept. 50 Tier 1 suppliers, 150 Tier 2 suppliers. They did the design. They came up with a plane that was completely different than Boeing had ever done. It was all composite. It was all electric. First time ever that the pressurization, climate control, wing anti-ice, all of it was electric. Before that, everything had been bleed air off of the turbine, the jet engine on the wing. So this was a huge win for them. The plane itself costs 11% less than the competing Airbus model. And in doing that, they've regained 17% market share. So when you challenge the convention about supplier-led design in the business ecosystem, you can get some pretty major wins here. Miniaturization, again, but not just mid-scale, small scale. Okay? That's a scale drawing of a small modular reactor and the Westinghouse AP1000, which actually I think now the little dome, concrete dome at the top is even thicker because the NRC said, what happens if an airplane hits it? So during the middle of construction, we got to thicken that up, put even more rebar in there, et cetera, et cetera. Element 4 was production systems. The only thing I'll say here is the management systems that we use are literally from the 1950s and 1960s. They have not benefited by modernization, computerization. The path of construction, once you have the digital twin, Lego's got this. They push a button and in 10 seconds it calculates 4 million possible paths of construction and writes the entire instruction booklet. That's pretty amazing. That actually enables us to have a different kind of worker if you have a step-by-step instruction booklet. Airbus actually prints the instruction booklet on the worker's safety glasses. So that's augmented reality, right? Or virtual reality. So there's a lot of things here, and we have to examine those. Element 5 is technology and systems, but it's not just sort of the computer side of the technology. There's technologies around the equipment that we use in our projects. So the thing that I'll tell you here is that, and when you put everybody on an integrated platform, you get some benefits out of that too, but multifunctional equipment. Most of our industrial facilities, one piece of equipment does one function. Well, the air separations people were able to reduce the footprint of their plants by 75% in a 20-year period. They did that by taking one piece of equipment and have it do 5 different functions. The only way that was possible is they had to work hand in hand with their suppliers. Again, supplier-led design could create some of these things. The graphic up here is pharmaceuticals. They've taken, for biotech production and bioreactors, they have half the number of pieces of equipment, and most of them are all disposable or recyclable. So normally when you make a batch of biotech drugs, you have to run the production for 2 weeks. You have to shut down for 2 weeks, clean everything, because it's a FDA requirement, and then you start up and make another batch. They said, that's crazy. We're just going to send all that stuff off to be recycled. Element 6 is the people. We're still going to have people, but really looking at that man-machine interface. And we saw a lot of examples of that here while we were at the Technology Showcase. Ultimately, that's reducing the need for workers out at the site. So the big thing here, and I'm kind of getting to the end, is blowing up this pyramid and reducing these transactional costs. So the pyramid, the OS1, the business system that we have on the left, it's got 40% transactional cost in it. The thin platform, open source, cloud-enabled kind of platform has 4% transactional cost. Instead of 1,000 contracts, you have 2. You have a contract basically with everybody above the line. That's the investors from the capital market. And you have 1 contract with everybody below the line, which is all the people that have to combine to produce the goods and services, the engineering necessary for it. The platform itself, a couple key things about it. It does the commercial finance, and it does the integration. So integration in our industry right now is done by a team of 100 or 400 or 1,000 people. We have an integrated project team. We have an aligned and integrated and a partnered project team. And we expect this team of 300 people to process all the possible combinations and variables. And what I'll tell you is they can't do it. They literally can't do it. Think about purchasing. We have a purchasing group in that 400 people. Are they going to come up with the idea to buy the part out of Japan into Mexico first and then move it across the border? Are they going to be able to process all that? Probably not. There's so much work that they have to do that they just missed out on that opportunity. So that's basically what this will do. It will do the tax. It will do all the stuff that actually nobody in this room wants to do. The platform, we think we're going to call it Prairie Dog. The whole idea of this is that a Prairie Dog is a builder of communities. They have their Prairie Dog towns. Sometimes they're miles or hundreds of miles long. They provide for everybody in their system. Nobody's above each other. They work collaboratively together. So that's what we call a construction industry marketplace and communication nexus. And it could be a platform of platforms. So Siemens has a platform, as you heard today. General Electric has a platform. Autodesk has a platform. Everybody's got a platform. The key part is how do you knit those together in an efficient way? How do you put together a business platform that really is the financial, legal, tax underpinning that we need foundationally for the industry. When we do that, and I'm about done, total cost of ownership. What you see in the graphic, the blue line is what we have today. So I've modeled a $4.3 billion mega project. You see that huge one-time cost right up at the front. It's very difficult to find $4.3 billion. It's not just necessarily lying around somewhere. Even in the biggest corporations, it's not. So you build this thing, you operate it for a while, then you gear up for a shutdown turnaround that hopefully lasts, closer to 30 days and not so much 60 or 90 days. You're working like crazy, the 24/7, all hands on deck. One thing I would just say about our industry management-wise is heroic management is a badge of honor. And that's not a good thing, right? But we pat each other on the back, we get promoted based on the fact that, man, heroic management, you swooped in at the last second, you saved this thing, you worked 24/7 for months on end, and it came out. That's actually not a sustainable way to run an operation. So getting away from that. The leasing line would be sort of that OS2, that orange line. You would pay, in the lean years, you would pay more, but you would reduce those peaks. You wouldn't not have those things. And that's basically what's going to take you to that return on investment that we're actually looking for. What does this mean for, let's say, an EPC firm? Well, I modeled that. So the EPC firm is on the left. And you take a series of those one-time events. I just took basically 4 of those mega projects. I said we can handle a mega project about every 2 or 3 years. You stack up those cash flows. This is actually the problem for a business development person at an EPC firm. They have a big project, and all of a sudden they're like, wait a second, I got to find another one of those to plug in here to keep my people busy. It's a very inefficient thing. The graph on the right is saying, like, well, okay, if you just kept getting paid over a 20-year period, what would that look like? It would even out your cash flow. And when that happens, actually the stock price will go way up. Wall Street hates the peaks and valleys. So that'll make it much more predictable, and you just keep layering in more projects. Every time you win another project, it just adds to that revenue. Now you could say, well, wait a second, I got to pay all these people in cash, lower than me in the pyramid. Not really, you don't have the pyramid anymore. But even if you said, okay, no, really, I need to take 50% of my payment up front, and then I can take the other part of it out over 20 years. That's just commercial lending. There's a whole set of pension funds, insurance companies, so on and so forth. They will do that. I have a traditional pension as a employee of the University of Texas, and it's called Teacher Retirement System. And it's designed that when I retire, it will pay me an annuity. It will pay, every month until I'm no longer here, right? There's no way that I'm going to do that. So what will happen is I will sell that policy to somebody like New York Life. They will buy that policy from me based on the fact of my life expectancy at the point when I retire, right? And they'll give me a cash lump sum, which is great because if I don't make it one more month after retirement, I'll have gotten all that money up front, okay? That's basically the same thing. Again, remember, the capital market's designed to do that to a lot of people at really relatively lower amounts. So what are we going to do with this? Well, yesterday we launched and announced that we've created the company. We're actively seeking investment over the next 4 months. So March 20th to July 20th, that'll end round 1 for the investment. And then we think actually in this process, we'll incubate new businesses and a number of things, but that company will have a management structure. It will basically fund 2 things: university-based research, that's the blue box, and subject matter experts like law firms, IT firms, and the like, consulting firms, to create ultimately at the bottom in a collaborative way a minimum viable product, a new financial business platform as I've described. So if you're interested in doing that, definitely want to talk to you. This is an area where we want to put our industry on a fast path to a brighter future. My closing comment is from Mickey Mantle. It's unbelievable how much you don't know about the game you've been playing your whole life. And he was a pretty good baseball player. And so if he's going to say something like that, I think we should question the game we've been playing the whole life. Like, is that really, he's also from Oklahoma, so like me. But I can't play baseball. So, but I think you do have to, really question some of these things and these sacred cows that a lot of us take for, as gospel. Really, we have to challenge those a little bit. So, last slide is just really the call to action. Put a Dilbert cartoon. This is the point where we actually begin to add value. I crossed out a few of those things. It's also the one area where you see the technical, the technology, and the engineer person as the hero, right, over the business. We're going to flip that around. We're not subservient to the business. We are the business. We are part of the business. And what we want to do at CII now, through OS2 and other ways, is really invest that innovation, that human capital into our future. So with that, I'll stop, and maybe Judy has some questions.
So I have a lot of questions, not all of them directly related. You've been going out and talking with people. You've been to Black & Veatch, you've been to companies. In the companies that have agreed already to invest, what level of the company made that agreement? Because I think part of our issue as a team here is that some of us aren't, we may or may not be the right people, and so we need to know how high up to take it. Is it generally the board of directors, the CEOs, that level? Yeah,
I think basically for most companies, if they're going to invest $500,000 a year in something, the levels of purchasing authority rest with the executive leadership team, the top 10 or 20 people in the company, and sometimes for many of them, it's either the CEO. And sometimes the CEO has to take that to the board of directors. So okay. I think the thing that everybody in this room, it's important to be able to potentially communicate the passion for this, that this is an opportunity for your companies actually to own this intellectual property that's being created. That's part of the investment opportunity that I went through with the board yesterday, was that you will own the intellectual property. There may be financial returns, but actually you're at the forefront of learning about this. I think it's highly likely that you'll get your money back over time, but you might not get any of it back. So I just think we have to do this, otherwise it's other people coming in and telling us how it's going to be, and that's going to be quite disruptive. Okay. But I think it's the homework assignment for everybody in the room is, if you really like this, certainly there are resources that we have to come explain this more to people, your colleagues at your company, and then have you advocate with your executive teams that this is something they may be interested in.
Okay, and many of you have asked about the presentation materials, and so I'll read you the text that I have from Eva. The general sessions are all going to be uploaded to the app and will be placed also on the CII webpage. You'll all be receiving an email shortly with the URL to that, and that'll include this presentation, I would assume.
Yep.
The app itself will be active for the next 12 months, so it's not like that's going to disappear either, and so that's a good thing. And then there's an attendee survey that we'll talk about. All right, so back to questions. We've got just a few more minutes. I feel like you just kind of blew everybody's minds. But Jamie yesterday was talking about really an instance of this happening, right? I mean, where so he was also, it was hard for people to formulate questions for him as well, and it was because they did their own manufacturing essentially. Mm-hmm. In this 2.0 model, do you anticipate the EPCs or the owners or people becoming manufacturers? Is that something you could foresee happening, or? I
mean, I think that's, so this is going to be the classic researcher answering. It depends on what the research shows, but okay. I think it's going to change the nature of how companies do everything. Okay. I think companies may spin out units, they may reposition them, they may hopefully not vertically integrate, but They may go into some of the manufacturing thing. I think what I really liked in Jamie's presentation was the fact that, you know, it was processing so many iterations. You even saw that in Kimona Numa's presentation, that, you know, this broad canvassing of all these people who potentially could design things. How do you crunch all those iterations to get out the optimal solution? Now, that was an optimal design solution. What we're talking about here is an optimal business solution.
Exactly.
Finance, tax, legal type solution. Yeah.
Okay.
But I think it is going to be disruptive. But I think as we bring people along, keep communicating that through everything that we're doing at CII, that you'll have insight to that, and a longer runway to sort of navigate that and position yourself for success. That's what I worry about the outsider coming in, is that all of a sudden overnight you didn't have that runway, and overnight you're faced with this massive disruption and potentially going out of business. Like John was saying, you know, half the Fortune 500 companies in 2000 aren't with us right now. So, and that's what you saw there, is mostly outsider disruption, the inability to move on to the digital landscape.
Okay. And then last question, if people want to actually look at the OS 2.0 prospectus, right, the agreement that people would be signing, is that available? Do they contact you?
It is available, yeah. They would contact us.
Okay.
And the reason for that is we have to put the company's name on there. There's some provisions in it that, almost like an NDA, that you're bound by. So we don't just run it on the Xerox machine and hand it out to everybody.
Okay.
They have to actually request it, and we send it, but it is already available. And that's why I said yesterday kicked off this 4-month period for the round 1 fundraising.
Okay.
The goal of which, and the reason why we conclude that on July 20th, is that our annual conference starts July 23rd. So we'll expect to see everybody here July 23rd through 25th, and hopefully we'll have a celebration not only of the CII's 35th anniversary, but the fact that we were successful in raising money for this OS2 venture.
Okay. And are there different tiers of investment, or is there just one level?
So I said default or nominally, we were saying $500,000 a year and I think the large companies, it's that. We've provided for some smaller firms to really have, I think, any level of investment. The actual minimum threshold is, I think, $100,000. So
okay.
You could have $100,000 per year for the next 3 years. Underneath that, you know, $10,000 a year. We decided not to do that just because it's a lot of cats to herd. So,
sure. Now, what about different, I mean, obviously owners and EPCs are part of the mix, but are you looking at equipment vendors? Are you looking at technology vendors?
Absolutely.
I mean, is there anybody?
Yeah, and those were some of the 50-odd companies that I had on the screen.
Yeah.
You had a mix of some of those.
Okay.
But honestly, still, this word is still just getting out. So, I mean, one of the reasons, and some of you in the room have heard a lot of this or portions of this. You know, I've been speaking at other events, continually refining the message and that kind of thing. I should have also mentioned, by the way, the reason why the CURT and the CII logos were on all the slides was that the Construction Users Roundtable and CII are really the two organizations that are spearheading the effort.
Okay.
And so I just wanted to, and their membership is incredibly excited about OS2, and they're also a lot of those companies that you saw on there. I would say
they're members of both.
Some of them are members of both. I think about half of those companies are not CII members, and a lot of them are CURT members. So there's a real nice blend of the industry coming together here. Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody, and thank you very much. Absolutely. It was wonderful to hear about this. And before I leave the stage, I just think Judy did a phenomenal job over the last day and a half. If you could give Judy a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much.